All right, it's time to talk some SEC football as we head into week 3. We got Brent Beaird on the line. You can catch him at First Coast News. Also, certainly on his College Sports Today show at 9:30 a.m. Jacksonville. Brent, how you doing this morning?
Mark, I'm doing well. Good to be with you as we are in another week of SEC football. Excited about what we will see this week. Obviously, LSU gave us a taste of what might be happening and really ramped the expectations up for them after that win over Texas last week. Big games with the Gators in Kentucky and Alabama at Columbia to face South Carolina. So just a little bit of snippets of what whets our appetite for this weekend within the league.
Yeah, let's start right there. We'll stop in Columbia where the Gamecocks welcome in Alabama for the first time since 2010. And, of course, that was a major upset as the defending national champion at the time under Greg McElroy at quarterback. Lost by a couple touchdowns to Steve Spurrier and company. That was a long, long time ago. And the odds makers certainly favor Alabama. The line opened at 21. It's ballooned to 26. Obviously, South Carolina was facing a brutal schedule to begin with, and they tripped up unexpectedly against North Carolina. So that doesn't help the outlook there in Columbia with Will Muschamp.
No, it really doesn't. And I remember that 2010 game very well. Frankly, Greg McElroy was your quarterback, was sacked basically half a dozen times, maybe one of the best games Steve Spurrier has ever called. And he admits that from a coaching viewpoint. Stephen Garcia was a quarterback, and he had just virtually Mark an out-of-the-body experience. Marcus Lattimore, the running back, Bama struggled, got behind early, and never really were able to catch up. Still, if that 2010 Bama team had beaten LSU, that there was still a lot of thought that they would be in the national championship. But, Mark, the interesting thing about it is these two teams being in the same conference have only played 15 times. And this is a sermon on another day, but you really do wonder when the SEC ever goes to 9 games if that will take care of that situation. I do think Bama wins pretty comfortably in this game. I know Ryan Hilinski is the new quarterback after Jake Bentley is out. They've got some pretty good talent with South Carolina, Rico Dowdle and Brian Edwards, who I think is trying to get together. He only caught one pass in the North Carolina game, but still, it will be hot, as it always is in Columbia this time of the year. But I do think Bama is able to get out early. If they play a clean game, I think Bama wins by, frankly, 3 or 4 touchdowns before this is over. They've just got a much better roster at this point. South Carolina really lost an opportunity to beat North Carolina, Mark, and I think that really hurt them. Bama's not perfect. They've still got to get their running game better with Brian Robinson and Najee Harris. And I think they will when the offensive line, Deontay Brown, gets back in a couple of weeks. They can play 7-on-7 football as well with anybody. And I'm a lot more impressed with their defense, Mark, than I thought I would be with all those losses to the NFL. So I think Bama's able to win, but that certainly doesn't mean that South Carolina won't play hard, and that place will be a frenzy when it kicks off.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Bama running game unexpectedly having a slow start. Offensively, they didn't score a point in the first quarter against Duke. That was obviously not an issue as the defense dominated 42-3. We can throw away last week's game to a certain extent, but back the likes of Brian Robinson only averaging 3.3 yards per carry and Najee Harris at a 5 flat average, not what Bama typically grinds out on the ground. The most important game of the week is certainly Kentucky hosting Florida. The Wildcats finished in the top 10 last year, their best year since 1977, obviously lost so much on defense. Benny Snell and now Terry Wilson, no longer a quarterback. They're breaking in a new one. They broke the big, long losing streak of 34 years to Florida last year, and the Gators come in with a 2-0 start in the win over Miami.
Yeah, the last time that Kentucky won a couple in a row was back in the 70s. I mean, Mark, that was like Fran Kersey territory, wasn't it? As we
That's right.
with that. But listen, if you're a Kentucky fan, you really need to be proud of what Mark Stoops has done for this team. Eddie Grand's done a good job, I think, as the offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, Sawyer Smith, the Troy Stanford transfer, comes over. And they've got, I think, two pretty capable running backs in Kaboisi Smoke and also Asim Rose, to mention a few. Now, Josh Allen, Mark, is down here with the Jacksonville Jaguars, so they're excited about him. So Kentucky will miss him. But I think my point is, now I do think Florida wins a game. I think they've got the better roster and the better team this year. But Mark Stoops being able to recruit the way he has in the state of Ohio has made a huge difference for them. And they want to be able to run the ball and control the clock, which is something they were able to do more last year. Kentucky really played well in Gainesville last year, but this is a crucial game for Florida. And I think they've got Tennessee next week in the Swamp at noon. That should be toasty, to say the least. And then, Mark, to me, what they've got to be able to do is split that series, which is basically back-to-back. Auburn comes into the Swamp, and then they go to LSU. I think if they can split that series, they could probably beat South Carolina and come into the Georgia game here in Jacksonville. I think with only one loss, I mean, they could be undefeated, but I think that would be something for them really to have to overcome. But Felipe Franks continues to improve. I mean, last week he was like 25 or 27. I mean, that's good against the kids in the backyard, didn't Mark? So I think they can run the ball better. Florida's had to replace 4 out of 5 offensive linemen. I think that's going to be huge for them. They need Kadarius Toney back. He got hurt last week. He's going to be missing this game. The guy they really need back quickly is C.J. Henderson. He got hurt last week too. But at the same time, they have got some good young talent, especially with some of these freshmen like this Elam kid that played a good bit last week too. And they're getting those guys on the field. So I think they will be fine. I do think Florida wins probably by a touchdown or more before it's over. But for right now, I think it tells you two things. One is how Florida is improving, and also the consistency, Mark, for Kentucky. Mark, has Stoops got his due, frankly, as a guy who has stabilized this program, got them in multiple bowl games, and I think is recruited better than people give him credit for. I think he reminds me a little bit about what Rich Brooks did for them over the years and getting to multiple bowl games again. So win or lose, I think Kentucky's on the right track at this point.
Yeah, he's certainly gotten his due from me, because once they started to beat teams like South Carolina and Mississippi State in September last year, and they just continued to be a significant underdog according to Vegas and just continued to knock the teams off. Florida, those were all double-digit spreads. Maybe not the South Carolina game wasn't, but Mississippi State at home, Florida on the road, they pull off these double-digit upsets and continue to win, and everybody's not sold because they're winning ugly. They're winning with the running game and the defense. But as you mentioned, Mark Stoops, and you hit it right on the head, he knew what was facing him at Kentucky in regards to trying to go into the Deep South and compete against the likes of Tennessee and Auburn and Alabama for recruits. So he headed north, and he's done a tremendous job, because after about 5 states, you're looking at Ohio as being maybe the 6th or 7th best recruited state at this point, and he certainly plucked a lot of gems out of there. Pennsylvania, West Virginia. I think his top player in the last recruiting class was actually out of Michigan. So he's been able to go the other direction and I don't want to say dominate against the likes of Ohio State and so forth in the recruiting battle, but gain a number of gems in that direction. And the product on the field has obviously been excellent for the last few seasons, and 10-3 this past 2018 campaign. Got Brent Beaird on the line. You can catch him on 9:30 a.m. in Jacksonville, College Sports Today. And also he does his college football analysis at First Coast News and helps us out quite a bit here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You can see right there in the banner my Week 3 predictions available at the link that you see below. Voice of College Football Community, 31-20 against the spread the first 2 weeks of the season. So, Brent, as I look it over, this is going to be the last week of a very light SEC schedule. Yeah. Starting next week, we'll really dive into some serious matchups, and there's really only one other game of consequence that the outcome would be in doubt, and that's Mississippi State hosting Kansas State. And the Bulldogs, of course, with Joe Moorhead in play in his second season, you would think that the program would be on a little bit better of a base of it being more of his team, his program. And both teams are off to 2-0 starts, and Mississippi State a pretty solid 7-point favorite, not necessarily for this game, but on down the road. What are your thoughts about the Bulldogs competing in the SEC West?
Yeah, State really spanked them last year. I think folks will probably remember that on the road, which is unusual. You don't go to Kansas State and win like that, but we know they needed to make a change, and they did, and you give them credit for that. Skylar Thompson is a quarterback at Kansas State who has done well, and they've got a kid named James Gilbert who transferred from Ball State that has helped them too. I think it's significant, Mark, that Tommy Stevens, it looks like that he's going to play the quarterback transfer from Penn State. I think that's going to be a help them if they are. To me, the big thing that State's had to do this year is replace that, or do the best they can in replacing that defensive line that basically all of them went to the NFL from last year. So with Stevens back, I can see them winning this game. But again, they've got obviously some difficult games that are coming up around the corner. Speaking of Kentucky, Mark, an intriguing game with them next week, right? Kentucky come to Starkville at that point, and then they play Auburn. And Auburn has struggled with Mississippi State over the last few years. So would it be safe to say from Kansas State, Kentucky, and Auburn, we'll know a heck of a lot more about Mississippi State over the next 3 weeks, won't we, Mark?
Yeah, I think that'll pretty much do it right there. They tend to schedule a bit light out of conference. They've had a lot of BYU, as you mentioned, the two-game series against Kansas State. So we typically don't know much about Mississippi State. Going back to that Dak Prescott 2014 year when they were number one in the country, at the one nice win against Texas A&M, and then we found out a little bit more come late October and November. Brent, I'm going to take you on opposite ends of the spectrum in the SEC in regards to wow and despair. Let's go LSU first. Your thoughts about Joe Burrow and company and their performance in Austin and what may lie ahead for the Tigers, and if they are a legitimate SEC contender, national championship contender.
Well, I think they showed us in Austin that they are. Now, the thing that all of us doubted was the fact of we heard about this spread offense. We heard that they were going to implement this. I'm not sure we all believed it, but to their credit, they did against Texas. And the truth of the matter is, Mark, if they had gone into that Les Miles shell, shall we say, in the second half, like they used to, Texas comes back and wins that game. But instead, they kept the pedal going and the gas going, and particularly was really impressed with that 3rd and long where Joe Burrow just made a tremendous play. 3 receivers with 100 yards at least. I still think Dave Aranda's defense stood up and played well when it needed to. Still believe that Dave Aranda is one of the better D coordinators in the league and, frankly, in the nation. So, yes, I do believe that LSU at this point is for real. They've got Vanderbilt that's coming up next week. Then they've got a bit of a break. And then they've got the Florida, Mississippi State, and Auburn situation before they get to November, and then they get to Alabama. So Joe Brady's done a good job, had he, Mark, along to bring this guy in. They've been comfortable with him so far in spreading the ball around. Now, again, will we continue to see this out of them? Will we continue to see this kind of play? in October, November, that remains to be seen. But to go on the road into a big time, basically top 10 opponent and be able to win when a lot of people didn't think they could, it was hard not to be impressed with them, right?
Yeah, and so as the saying goes, you don't win with the X's and O's, you win with the Jimmy and Joes.
Right.
But for LSU, I guess you just win with the Joes. You don't need the Jimmies. You got the two Joes and Joe Brady and Joe Burrow getting the job done in the passing game. And it was just a spectacle to see Joe Burrow operate that offense. And maybe teams in the SEC are going to get used to seeing this little wave if they taunt him too much on the sideline, as the faithful did in Austin as he was throwing up 471 yards and 4 touchdowns. So it's going to be a whole lot of fun if we can get an LSU team that's prepared to play Alabama in Tuscaloosa for the first time in quite some time. Brent, I'm going to take you on the other end of the spectrum. We expect these type of situations at Vanderbilt and more recently at Ole Miss and Arkansas, even though they've got their proud football traditions. But at Tennessee, Georgia State wins by 8 points. It was a 2-score game with 4 or 5 minutes left. And then losing to BYU isn't necessarily an embarrassment. I don't want people to misinterpret that. Tennessee should not lose to BYU, especially at home. But it's not. It's a legitimate Power 5 type program. But the way in which they lost, again, a blown assignment, blowing a game in which they had it right there strategically in regards to score and field position. They had the game won, and they gave up a ridiculous play with 20 or 25 seconds left in the game, or less than that. And just the situation where we could tolerate, I would think, 5-7 last year because we saw the building blocks and we saw the fine performances against Kentucky and Auburn. But this year to start, again, almost like a South Carolina, where you see the brutal schedule down the road, but we assumed with Tennessee they would pick up their 4 quote-unquote easy wins out of conference to set them up for postseason play, and they can't even win those games.
Well, the thing that's in Tennessee's favor is they played hard against BYU. Now, they still make way too many mental mistakes, and that's at some point is got to be corrected. Jeremy Pruitt really just still does not have the players that he needs. I mean, Trey Smith arguably is one of the best players in the SEC, offensive lineman or not. Garantano at quarterback, Mark, has frankly regressed. He's not making the decisions he made last year. People may remember that game against Auburn. I mean, he was as sharp as any quarterback there was the whole year. And he was just dropping dimes all over the place. That's not happening this year. And how in the world are they going to get that going again? To take advantage of some of the talent they've got at the skill position players, such as Jennings. They'll win this week against Chattanooga, but they've got a crucial game, I think, next week against Florida. If they can win in Gainesville, that could certainly turn their season around. At this point too, but look, if they start out 2-5 or 1-6, at that point, all bets are off. Now, what we don't know, Mark, is this: how long can, and I think he can, if he wants to, Phil Fulmer keep the Wolves away. Now, Fulmer's powerful enough as the AD at Tennessee to where if he comes out, and look, Fulmer could deal with a lot of this, Mark, in the next few weeks by coming out and say, I want to be clear about this. We need to give Jeremy time, and he's going to be the coach at the end of the year, and he's going to be the coach next year. If he comes out and says that would dispel some of these rumors, particularly about Fulmer wanting to get this job and run out of the tee and to polish up his image as a Tennessee football coach that's also going on. But it's very obvious they're going to need, and Mark, I said this during the offseason, Tennessee needs a couple more years to at least be competitive. That they've got to recruit better than what they're doing. They've got to be able to coach these kids better than what's happening. These kids have got to be able to respond. It's very difficult right now. There's no question about that. But I do think what helped Tennessee in that game is they at least had the effort you needed. They made some mental mistakes, there's no question. And frankly, should have won the game. But I just didn't see the laydown that I did against Georgia State. They were in the game. The fans were there. How much longer will they be able to hang on? These next two games, particularly the game next week in Gainesville, is very crucial for them.